We have a unique opportunity here today. We've got a little side pool here that's absolutely full of crayfish. But what we're really looking for here today is how the lures we use to mimic crayfish look in comparison to real crayfish. And the goal here today isn't to see which of these baits looks the best or looks the most realistic. Some look more realistic than others. We basically just want to see how these baits look in comparison, because a lot of times you think about an Alabama rig where you've got 6 swim baits and one is a different color. A lot of times that's the one that's going to get a strike. There's something to be said about matching the hatch. I mean, specifically if a smallmouth or a largemouth is coughing up crayfish and the crayfish is a certain color, you bet you're going to want to use that same color in a jig profile or a soft plastic. But sometimes being a little different looking in a bunch of, say, 100 crayfish is going to get you bit. So we're going to compare both soft baits and hard baits today. We're rigging soft baits on shaky heads, on swing heads. We're going to Texas rig some. And like I said, we're also going to look at hard baits, because a lot of times we use crankbaits to imitate crayfish. So we've got some crayfish colored crankbaits that we're going to run right parallel to these live ones and see how you can best maneuver your crankbait to mimic exactly what these crayfish are doing. So the first bait we're going to look at is a Z-Man crawdads. And this is a bait that you're going to use on a Ned rig or like a shaky head. So right now we've just got a Mustad Ultra Point mushroom head. So that's just a standard jig head type thing. Of course, Z-Man Elastec floats, so those craws are going to be up in the air like this. And we're going to run that right alongside some live crayfish to show you how it looks. You know, Mark Daniels Jr. likes to say, turbo craws up in the jaws. And we're gonna see how that looks right now on a football head. You can fish this bait a lot of different ways, but since we're dealing with rocks and we want to stay on bottom and scoot along, we're gonna throw it on a football head. This is a Mustad football head, just for example. And this is an Elastec bait as well. Floats, extremely stretchy, no air in the claws. So this is more of a swimming type bait. And see how a swimming craw looks next to these crayfish. So the next bait we're going to look at is a Savage Gear 3D crayfish on a football head. And we're going to demonstrate this the way you'd fish a football head, scooting across the rocks horizontally. We got a couple different sizes. I'm going to go with the smaller size and relative to the size of the crayfish we have here today. But like I said, Savage Gear 3D crayfish, and we're going to pair it with a Mustad football head. Again, just dragging it horizontal across the rocks. Football head is designed to kind of deflect and move around in rocks really well. So this is a popular adaptation we've already ran underwaters of this bait. That's the Savage Gear 3D craw on a Neko rig. So we've got a VMC half moon weight in there, O-ring around the thorax of the crayfish, and then a Neko hook. And that's gonna go backwards in the water like that. And the weight should help it fold down like this. you know, a lot of times it's favored to have your craws float. That puts the crayfish in a defensive position. So we're going to experiment with putting a nail weight in the nose of the cray to try to put it horizontal, more horizontal, and get that fin kicking backwards like that. But we'll see how this looks first in comparison to these real crayfish. So as you can see from the underwaters, the crayfish is kind of almost always in a vertical or defensive position. And there is a theory that bass don't always commit to crayfish when they're in that defensive position. So in order to make it look a little more realistic, we're going to feed a little nail weight into the nose of the crayfish to counterweight the floating in the front and to counterweight the weight in the back. So this is a 3/64 ounce nail weight that we're going to shove right into the head of the crayfish to see if that counterbalances it. So the next bait we're going to look at is a Jean Leroux salt craw. This is a staple crayfish bait in the history of bass fishing. It's been a great classic lure, and we are going to Neko rig that as well. So I just grabbed another 3/64 ounce nail weight, and then we'll run that alongside these crayfish. So this is a cool bait. This is an extension of the TRD line. It's a TRD craw, which is, you know, the TRDs are an amazing bait for Ned rigging. Kyle Peterson's got the tiny child rig. Look that up if you haven't seen it already. And we're gonna do it, again, Neko rigged, just to show you in comparison. And again, Elastec floats, so these craws are gonna be floating up. So the next bait we're going to do is a Gary Yamamoto Psycho Dad. This is another really cool underwater that we've shot in the past that we get an opportunity to run right alongside actual crayfish, like I said. Same thing with these, lots of air in the claws of this bait, so it floats up a lot. Another important thing to note when you're Neko rigging, especially a crayfish style bait, this is going to be going backwards like that. So you want the hook point facing towards the head, just as you would any other Neko rig, but it's especially important with crayfish that are going to be moving backwards and fish is chasing it this way. So next up, we're going to look at how some of these craw baits look on a Tokyo rig. And when you think Tokyo rig, a lot of times you think punch-in, thick cover and stuff like that. This is a really good rig to run over rocks. And what do you use when you're fishing over rocks? craw style baits. So we're gonna try a variety of craw style baits on a Tokyo rig while we're at it. So this is just a Jean Leroux hammer craw, and we'll see what that looks like. So we're rifling through baits here. This is a 13 Fishing Ninja Craw. So we're gonna try that on a Texas rig and right now Tokyo rig. It's a little difficult right now because the water is a little shallow, but hopefully you can get the idea of what this thing looks like when it's swimming across the rocks, because a good way to do this, like I said, is drag it. And you can drag a swim bait too. A paddle tail swim bait looks awesome on a Tokyo rig. But a lot of times we use cross style or creature style flipping baits. Like a beaver bait is amazing on a Tokyo rig. There we go. Ninja Craw on the Tokyo rig right there. So we're gonna revisit the turbo craw on more of a flip and pitch style bait like this Tokyo rig. We'll also do it on a Texas rig. But one unique thing I wanna mention about the Tokyo rig is that when you snap it, the weight swings and makes the end of the crayfish flutter like that, which is really good for these swimming craws right there, those swimming claws. So I want you to take note of that. When I pop it, the weight swings and that controls the way the crayfish juts backwards. So we did some Tokyo rig stuff. We're gonna do the Lunker Hunt Descend Craw right now. And they call it Descend because it's got a heavily salted core, and if you know anything about plastics that are heavily salted, they sink a lot faster. So there's specific instructions to fish this craw weightless on this EWG hook. So we're gonna do just as the package says, rig this big fat craw up on that EWG weightless and glide it along those crayfish down there. So like I said, this thing is extremely dense. This is almost the exact opposite of a Laztec, where it floats and is super stretchy. This stuff is almost solid, which makes it sink faster, which is why they suggest fishing it weightless. So I'm simply gonna Texas rig this thing, no weight, slide the shank down, bury the knot, cheat on the plastic a little bit, just like that. That's a big fat craw profile right there. So we'll see how that sinks and works on a horizontal plane. A swing head on a creature or a cross style bait is a great presentation in rocks. We've shot underwaters with this bait before, but now we get a chance to see what it looks like next to real crayfish, like I've been saying. And this sets up pretty nice right here, like a Tennessee River ledge lake. This is all shelf rock, there's a little bit of clams, but there's also a steep edge right here, and we're gonna try to run the swing head parallel to it to give you a good idea what it might look like on a ledge. So another bait we wanted to try on the swing head was this 13 fishing wobble craw. It's kind of designed to be on a swing head type hook. And so we'll see what that looks like down there. That's a pretty juicy looking bait right there. Let's check it out. So the last category we're gonna do for the soft baits is like a punch rig or a flipping rig. No peg on here today. See if that makes a difference. And we're gonna use this Punch from Culprit. As the name suggests, it's a punch bait, smaller profile, looks a lot like a craw, a lot of tendrils on there. So we'll see how that looks. So you might ask, why no peg? And if we're really going to be punching this in thick vegetation, we would definitely be using a peg. But I want to point out the fact that a crayfish kicks off fast. So when I give this thing a twitch, the sinker is immediately connected to the bait. So it takes off fast. And then the sinker will get ahead of the bait, and that lets the crawfish kind of lackadaisically fall naturally as a crayfish would, because a crayfish takes off fast and then glides and slowly falls back down to bottom. So this is a really good representation of that. Another really good thing you can do for that same presentation is a Carolina rig. Carolina rig is going to be led on a leash, the old ball and chain, and then it's going to lackadaisically fall back down to bottom. So it scoots back when it's tight on the weight, and then it falls slowly like a crayfish does naturally. So we've just taken a look at a whole array of soft baits. Now we're going to move on to some hard baits. Mainly what we're going to be looking at is crankbaits. There's a lot of craw-colored crankbaits that you're going to be digging down in the rocks with. Square bills especially, deflecting off rocks. So we're going to take a look at some of these crayfish patterns and how they look alongside real crayfish. So we're going to start the hard baits off with a new 13 fishing cliff banger. As you can see, that's kind of a red craw color. And so we're going to deflect on this shelf rock here, pass it along those crayfish, and see what it looks like in comparison. Now we're going to look at how square bills deflect down there. So this is a KVD 2.5 Strike King square bill. Now we're going to look at the Scamp 2 new crankbait from 13 Fishing as well, with a square bill and a real cool craw pattern on that bait as well. So now we're tying up that Scamp. This is a 2.5 crankbait as well, designed to dive 2.5, 3 feet, just like that KVD 2.5 from Strike King. A little wider profile on this crankbait, so we'll see how that looks in comparison as well. So here's a real, ultra realistic crankbait. This is a Megabass X-Dad. It's got antenna just like crayfish do. Lots of fine details on this crankbait. Not a square bill, a little bit smaller profile. We'll see how that looks as well. So the last two profiles that we're going to take a look at, of course, are jig. This one happens to be a football jig. This is a Z-Man cross-eyes football jig. And we've got a turbo craws paired on the back of that as well. So you got to take a look at what a jig looks like, because of course we're fishing a jig on the bottom a lot. So we'll pitch this thing out there, run alongside those crayfish. So one thing a lot of people don't consider is the fact that you can slow roll a vibrating jig or a bladed jig on bottom to replicate a crayfish. So this is a Terminator shutter bait, and we are pairing it on a 13 fishing Ninja Craw again. It's kind of cool, the purples and the greens really match up. One specific reason I chose this color is because of that translucent lip. Most of the time you've got a bright chrome flashy silver blade on the front of that. This is a little more natural looking, so it's a little less distracting, we'll say. So we'll see how that looks slow rolled along the bottom. So we've shot a ton of different soft baits today, but we didn't even scratch the surface of the craw baits that are on the market out here. So you guys should let us know what baits you want to see in comparison to live crayfish. Maybe there's something we missed. Maybe there's a rigging style that you really want to see. So feel free to comment on this video. Tell us what you want to see underwater. We have the capabilities. We will shoot it right alongside real crayfish. So to wrap this up, like I said, we've looked at a lot of different crayfish baits, a lot of different rigging methods. They all seem to look really, really cool and have different applications for different times of the year and different bottom structures. So you can take a look at those and base it off the region that you're from.